All right, last but not least in our little CNC family, I would like to introduce you to my friend Sven. So, you probably noticed right off the bat that Sven looks like a horse of a completely different color. And that's because he is. Sven kind of looks like Oli, but flipped over on his side, due to the fact that Sven has a horizontal spindle. That is because Sven is a CNC lathe. What's the difference, you ask? There are some very prominent differences. So if you recall from the mill and the routers, we take the cutting tool and we put it up in the spindle, and the cutting tool actually rotates as it carves out the part. Not Sven. Sven is different. Sven is unique. Sven actually takes the workpiece into his spindle, turns the workpiece down, while a stationary non-rotating tool glides in and across the part to cut the profile. Other predominant difference between Sven and his buddies here is the fact that Sven only has 2 axes. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, poor Sven, what a bummer. He only gets 2 axes? That's not fair. Sven really only needs 2 axes. So you're probably wondering, well, which axes did they remove? Well, Sven does not have a y-axis. But like the other machines, his z-axis is from the spindle nose to the opposite direction. And in this case, his x-axis is the tool carriage axis, and that moves in and out. So the x-axis on Sven is 4 inches, so it can go all 4 inches total travel. The z-axis actually has 10 inches of travel. I'm thinking, wow, 10 inches, that's a pretty long part to spin in this little guy. And you are right, which is why we've got this little doohickey here. This is called a tailstock. What's a tailstock? Tailstock is actually just there to support the tail of the end of a longer piece. If you don't have a tailstock in there, I want you to kind of envision like putting a 1-inch workpiece in here and hanging that out 10 inches. That's a pretty significant amount of hangout, especially on something that's only about that big. What can happen is, especially on softer materials, if you get it whipping around at the max RPM that Sven is capable of, which is 5,000 RPM, that material can actually bend. And the next thing you know, that unsupported material is whipping around like a wet noodle, and it can be a major danger. So rule of thumb, typically, I mean, my rule of thumb is 3 times the diameter of the tool. Some people will go up to 5. But for example, if you're putting in a 1-inch workpiece, 1 inch in diameter, and you are hanging it out more than 3 to 5 inches, you're going to want to go ahead and give them some support on the backside there. Other considerations is the fact that if you do have a part, and even if it doesn't start whipping around, you're going to get what's called deflection. So it's going to want to kind of push in because you have some leverage. Think of like a pry bar, and you're pressing into it. It's going to want to push into that workpiece, and you're going to be out of tolerance before you know it. Other things about Sven is you'll notice here in his spindle nose, he has a collet. A collet is basically, and we'll get into collets later, but just for all intents and purposes right now, a collet is actually a piece that kind of hugs the workpiece, and you tighten it up back here and it secures it, just cinching all the way around it. Well, you're probably thinking, well, gosh darn it, that's not a very big hole. You can't hold a very big piece in there. So with the collet system, you can hold about 1 inch to 1 inch and 1/16. If you want to hold something a little larger in diameter, then you're going to need the assistance from my friend Chuck. And there are many different flavors of chucks, and we'll get into that in a fixturing episode. But I did want to let you know that there are other options for work holding. That's a whole new beast in itself. So other things that you probably want to know is when you're looking at lathes, you probably see some terminology like swing over bed, swing over carriage. What does that mean? So if you recall, this is the carriage, the part that carries the tool along in the x-axis. It also moves across the bed. This is the bed in the z-axis. So if you have a larger part in here and one of your friends, Chuck, what's going to happen is if the part's too big, you're going to go ahead and smuck right into that carriage. So they have a number called swing over carriage, which goes from the center line of the spindle to the top surface of this carriage. So in this case, the largest part that you can hold is going to be 4 inches in diameter under the carriage. Well, why 4? Because you have 2 inches of clearance, while 4 is just the diameter. And remember, you're swinging half and you're going from the center line. So you have 4 inches max stock that you can swing over the top of that. And over the bed, you've got 8 inches total swing. So you can hold a piece that's 8 inches in diameter, but you only have 4 inches of clearance from the bed to the center of that spindle nose. And I do apologize if I'm a little rough on this one. So full transparency, most of my career has been in 3 to 4 axes equipment. And I didn't do a lot of lathe work in most of my career. So Sven and I are still kind of getting acquainted. I am really looking forward to it though, and hopefully we'll get a chance to learn some stuff together. Thanks.